How do you cross an immense, overwhelming flood? A flood of information, of problems, of just existence itself when you feel completely unsupported. It's a pretty deep question, isn't it? And that's one we're diving into today. Our deep dive takes us into a really ancient, profound dialogue. It's from the Pali Canon. We're looking specifically at a section called the Questions of Upasiva. That's Upasīvamāṇarapacchā in Pali. And it's this fascinating exchange, really, between this questioner, Upasiva, and the Buddha, who's called the all-seeing one here. So our mission today is to unpack their conversation. It starts with this really very human plea for some guidance, but leads to some pretty mind-blowing insights about, well, liberation, consciousness, what happens when suffering actually ends. We want to pull out the practical wisdom, but also the really surprising ideas hidden in these lines, make them relevant for you. Yeah, the source material we're working with is a series of 8 verses. They're numbered 1069 to 1076. Each one has either a question from Upasiva or an answer from the Buddha, and it wraps up pretty simply. The questions of Upasiva are finished.
Okay, so let's set the stage. Upasiva's first dilemma, verse 1069. His plea sounds really urgent. He says, I, Saka, that's an epithet for the Buddha, am unable to cross the great flood unattached. Tell me, all seeing one, a support relying on which I might cross this flood. I mean, that feeling of being swamped, needing a lifeline, that's pretty relatable, right?
Oh, absolutely. It really resonates. And this great flood, the Mahantamagga, it's such a powerful image. It's not literal water, of course. It's a metaphor, a really deep one, for the currents of existence. The torrent of suffering, desires, ignorance, all the stuff that just sweeps us along. And what's surprising maybe is how Upasiva's desperation facing this ancient flood feels so much like us today. Overwhelmed by, say, information overload or just life's challenges, feeling totally unsupported.
So how does the Buddha respond to this cry for help, for his support? Verse 1070 gives his answer, and it's, well, surprisingly direct. He says, viewing nothingness, mindful Upasiva, relying on there is nothing, cross the flood. Having abandoned sensual pleasures, abstaining from talk, directly see the end of craving. Okay. Viewing nothingness as a support. That sounds almost paradoxical. How do we understand that?
Yeah, that's the crucial bit, isn't it? Viewing nothingness, ākiñcaññaṃ, and relying on there is nothing. It's not about nihilism. It's not saying everything is meaningless. That's a common misunderstanding. The really radical idea here is that the ultimate support isn't found by grabbing onto something external or even like a solid concept of something. It's actually about a profound letting go. A deep recognition that liberation comes from releasing that need for any external support, any fixed idea.
Okay, so it's less about finding a thing and more about a way of seeing, or not seeing.
Exactly. And the practical steps he mentions, abandoning sensual pleasures, less idle talk there about quieting the mind, stripping away the attachments, the noise that feeds that flood in the first place.
Yeah.
That allows you eventually to directly see the end of craving itself.
Right, the source of the flood. Okay, so with that sort of foundational advice given, Upasiva doesn't stop there. Like any good questioner, he pushes deeper, and his questions get, well, more nuanced now. We start getting into the really interesting territory about the state of someone who is actually liberated. So verse 1071, he asks, if someone is free from lust for all sensual pleasures, relying on nothingness, having abandoned other things, supremely liberated in the deliverances of perception, okay, quite a description there, then he asks, would such a person remain there not pursuing further? He's basically asking, is this it? Is this the final stop, a permanent state of rest?
And that description is key to understanding what liberated means in this context. Free from lust for all sensual pleasures, check. Relying on nothingness, we just talked about that. And then supremely liberated in the deliverances of perception. That's a fascinating phrase. Think about it like being freed from the automatic ways our minds usually filter reality. The judgments, the labels, the constant inner chatter.
So it's liberation from the perception process itself, not just feeling better within it.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's suggested to be a really deep fundamental freedom. So Upasiva's question is, okay, does this person just stay like that?
And the Buddha's answer in verse 1072 is incredibly simple. Just, yes, such a person would remain there, not pursuing further.
Yeah. Short and sweet.
Almost too simple. That yes seems definite. But what does remaining there really imply? Does it mean they still exist in some way we can grasp? Or is something else going on?
Well, that's exactly the paradox Upasiva is wrestling with, and probably many of us listening to, remaining there. It doesn't necessarily lock it into continued existence in a way we normally define existence. It kind of sets the stage for the next part, hinting that this liberated state might be beyond our usual categories of being or not being. It's more of a pointer, maybe, than a full description.
Right. It opens up more questions, which is exactly what Upasiva does in verse 1073. He's clearly trying to map this onto ideas of identity of consciousness. Yes, if they remain there for many years, all-seeing one, would they become cool and liberated there? And would there be consciousness for such a person? That's the big one, isn't it? Consciousness, Vinya. What happens to the sense of self, the awareness after liberation?
The million-dollar question, indeed. What happens to Vinya?
So does the Buddha give a straight answer to that? What about consciousness? Well, he answers with this really striking analogy. It's famous. Verse 1074, he says, like a flame thrown by the wind goes out and cannot be reckoned, so too the sage liberated from the name body goes out and cannot be reckoned.
Wow. Yeah, that is vivid imagery.
It really is.
And it's powerful, but also often misunderstood. The flame analogy. Think about a candle flame. When you blow it out, where does the flame go?
Well, nowhere. It just stops being a flame.
Exactly. You can't point to it. You can't measure its location after it's out. It just ceases as flame. So similarly, the sage liberated from the name body, Muni Namakaya Vimuto, also goes out and cannot be reckoned.
Okay, name body. What does that encompass? Is that just the physical body?
It's more than that. It's basically everything we typically identify with me. Your name, sure, your physical form, but also your thoughts, feelings, memories, perceptions, even your consciousness. It's the whole package deal.
The entire construct of the individual self.
Right. The insight here is that when liberation is total, that whole framework of individual identity, the very basis for what can be named or measured or pointed to as a person, it just ceases to apply.
It's not destroyed necessarily, but the conditions for it existing in that way are gone, like the conditions for the flame.
That's a good way to put it. The basis for reckoning, for conceptualizing it, is gone.
Okay, but Upasiva, understandably, is still trying to pin this down. Verse 10075. He asks, basically, okay, so has that one gone out? Or does that one now not exist? Or is that one eternally healthy, like in some permanent blissful state? Please, sage, explain this well to me, for indeed this teaching is known to you. You can really hear him grappling, trying to fit it into some kind of box he understands. Is it this or that or the other thing?
Absolutely. It's such a human thing to do, isn't it? He lays out the three main ways we tend to think about what happens after death, or in this case, after liberation. Gone out, like annihilation. Not exist, just nothingness. Or eternally healthy, some kind of prominent positive state. It perfectly highlights our deep-seated need to categorize, to put everything, even the ultimate, into our familiar conceptual frameworks. Is it something or is it nothing?
But the Buddha's response seems to just dismantle those categories.
Completely. And this leads to the final, conclusive, and maybe the most challenging answer in verse 1076.
The Buddha says, for one who has gone out, Upasiva, there is no measure by which one could speak of them. That measure does not exist for them. When all phenomena are uprooted, all paths of designation are also uprooted.
Boom. That's the core of it.
No measure by which one could speak of them. What does that fully imply?
It's profound. It means any conceptual framework, any language, any way we try to define or measure or describe existence, it just doesn't apply anymore to one who is truly liberated. When all phenomena, sabbe suddamesu, meaning all conditioned things, all building blocks of experience are uprooted, then all paths of designation, vadapata pisabe, all ways of talking about things, all discourse, all concepts are also uprooted.
So the very tools we use to understand and talk about reality, language, concepts, measures, they cease to be relevant for describing that state.
Precisely. True liberation isn't arriving at a new, definable state. It's transcending the entire framework of definition and measurement. It fundamentally challenges our basis for knowing and speaking about reality itself. It's not a thing or a non-thing in our terms. It's utterly beyond them.
Wow. Okay, so we started this deep dive with Upasīva feeling like he was drowning in this metaphorical flood, needing support. And we've journeyed through this conversation to an understanding that liberation isn't about reaching a describable shore exactly, but maybe about realizing the flood itself and the ways we try to measure it are part of what needs to be transcended.
That's a really insightful way to put it. It's about transcending the framework itself.
So thinking about this for yourself, listening,
Yeah.
what does it mean to even consider a state that's beyond description, beyond measure? How might letting go, even just a little, of our constant need to define, categorize, and label everything?
Yeah.
How might that free us up, even in small ways, from that feeling of being overwhelmed, that flood of information or just mental noise?
Mm-hmm. And here's a final thought to maybe chew on. If the ultimate state is one where, as the text says, all paths of designation are uprooted. What does that really tell us about the inherent limits of our own tools, language, thought, even our deepest questions when we try to grasp ultimate reality? Something to ponder, perhaps, as you navigate your own floods.